Good morning, everybody. I believe that we all share the view that cooking lies at the heart of many households. Maybe not everyone, but in many households. And in a very particular way, culinary practices and food traditions also help in shaping cultural identity. And for the people of Vlaardingen, we have long had substantial knowledge indeed about the plants and animals they were used. Yet, until recently, we knew surprisingly little about how these foods components were actually transformed into daily meals. And it is precisely this gap that our project set out to address. For that reason, understanding cooking practices, so literally looking inside people's cooking pots, became one of the components of the research project whose completion we celebrate today. The burning of food can be seen either as an unfortunate accident or, from archaeological perspective, actually it is a blessing. When the food residues are preserved, they are usually, or most of the time, charred and firmly attached to either inner or outer surface of the potsherds. And such residues are generally considered to reflect the original contents of the vessels and to represent one of the last meals cooked in the pot. And just is to show who was actually cooking at the time and who ruled the world of northwestern Europe during the late Neolithic. Clearly, the Trechterbeker and Vlaardingen people, followed shortly afterwards by the corded-ware culture. For this project, we selected 3 sites. They have been mentioned already in this beautiful film here. Pottery assemblages, of course, and these are shown in this paleogeographical map, highlighting their location in distinct environmental zones. So that would be from coastal dunes at Steinhof to the inland wetland levees at Vlaardingen and Heckelingen. During the early years of the project, we held several pottery sampling sessions, as shown as this photos. Well, these are the results of our selection from each site. Well, we selected sherds from both food crust analysis and absorbed residue analysis. And today, however, I will focus on the food crust, as I would like to emphasize the daily cooking rather than the long-term use of the pots. But the study of food crust, however, is a complex matter, and not single research method is sufficient. Therefore, different disciplines are usually combined, each with its sensitive methods. For this project, we chose scanning electron microscopy and lipid residue analysis. At this point, I would like to highlight that it is for the very first time in Dutch archaeology that large assemblages of food residues encrusted on pottery have been studied using this integrated approach. Well, in principle, SEM enables the identification of plant particles and certain animal remains that have survived the food preparation and cooking. And for this project, SEM analyses were carried out at the RCE SEM lab in Amsterdam. And this is in principle how the lipid residue lab looks in York. In general, lipid residue analysis enables the differentiation of fats derived from ruminant, non-ruminant plant oils, aquatic resources, both marine and freshwater, and the identification of dairy products. Well, in this project, we also applied recently developed high-resolution mass spectrometry at the University of York to identify cereal-specific biomarkers. And there is a name of this biomarker, and I just dare to say this in the short, AR. Now, I'm moving to our combined results, and I will start with Vlaardingen. Under the SEM, many food crusts from Vlaardingen reveal the presence of herbaceous stem fragments. Importantly, some of the crusts revealed diagnostic features of these herbaceous stems, specifically epidermal and vascular tissue, which indicated that indeed they belong to one of the allium species, as already mentioned in the film, most likely wild chives, leek or white garlic. And the greens of white allium were likely used to flavor the fish that was cooked in Vlaardingen pots, as indicated by multiple fish scales embedded in food residues, often together with allium greens. Fish cooked with the addition of green plants, including allium, seems to have been a common dish prepared in Vlaardingen. In some residues, like this one, the herbaceous stems were clustered together, which you see very well, suggesting they made up a significant portion of the prepared food. But how do we know it was freshwater fish? Well, the presence of fish scales, just to start with, suggests that they must have entered the pots being still attached to the skin. Possibly the whole fish or chunks of fish were cooked. And because the scales are often fragmented, determination of fish species based just on SEM is difficult and impossible. But the one exception is the scale embedded in one of the residues, which was identified for us as most likely perch scale. Perca fluviatilis, what a beautiful name, huh? When we look into the lipid residues and results, the processing of fish oil is evident in nearly all the pots. Equally significant is the presence of both freshwater and anadromous fish. This graph shows the range of values that likely reflect differences in the feeding behavior of the fish species present, where in particular the more carbon isotope enriched values probably correspond to marine or anadromous species, for example, sturgeon, while the lower values are consistent with the freshwater species, like perch or pike. Interestingly, the same results suggest that sturgeon may have been cooked on its own without additional ingredients. Well, we have also observed that sturgeon appears to have been cooked in larger pots, while freshwater fish in smaller pots. Yet, this correlation would ideally need to be established on a larger number of vessels. Within ruminant carcass fats from sheep, cattle, and possibly wild ruminants were also detected in a few vessels. However, there is no evidence for dairy products and no evidence or indication of cereal processing, neither SEM or in lipid residues. I will just summarize this a bit for you, the cooking practices as Vlaardingen. So the fish dominated the cooking activities with biomarkers indicating both freshwater and likely anadromous fish, possibly including sturgeon. And freshwater fish were often cooked with green plants, including allium, perhaps as culinary staples, while sturgeon appears to have been prepared with no additional components. And a few vessels contain ruminant fats, but there is no evidence for dairy or cereal processing. Similar to Vlaardingen, many pots from Heckelingen revealed presence of fish scales indicating fish-based dishes. In some pots, fish was accompanied by green plants, also here including allium. As further taxonomic determination of allium species is difficult, just based on the results or remains that we have, we can perhaps suggest a few species that might fit the environmental context of the sites. This would indeed be a wild chives, leek, and white or crow garlic. Anna Lu asked me earlier this week when this plant would typically be collected. Well, I would think the best time would be in spring, also through the summer, and sometimes even in winter if you are lucky, because then the fresh shoot starts just to show up. A particularly noteworthy addition to the food crust data is the presence of allium pollen at Heckelingen, identified within the occupation layer. But I believe Helmut will tell us much more about this later on in her talk. Again, the overall lipid residue data on food crust confirms that processing fish was a major component of daily culinary practices at Heckelingen. As with Vlaardingen, the range of carbon isotope values again indicates that both freshwater and anadromous fish were present in these vessels. But there are also more differences. At Heckelingen, at least one pot was used to process dairy fats, and compared to Vlaardingen, there are more vessels with lipid evidence for processing ruminant fats. I wanted to show this same image if there is anyone in the audience who could perhaps confirm or not whether this might be the plates or the bone plates from sturgeon embedded in one of the residues from Heckelingen. And there is one more difference in daily cooking practices compared to Vlaardingen, where in one of the vessels from Heckelingen, evidence of cereal cooking was observed in some images. Numerous grain particles actually were embedded in the residue matrix, revealing single-layered aileron, here likely indicating emmer wheat. The aileron layer, which stores the grain's protein, often remains intact during the food preparation, cooking, and eventually charring. Well, the lipid analysis on this food crust suggested that this cooking event was actually about the mixed dish of emmer grain and likely ruminant adipose component, which could be from any part of the body, the meat or the fat. Here, just a quick sum up about Häcklingen cooking practices, where we have evidence for processing of both freshwater and likely anadromous fish. A freshwater fish was also here often cooked with green plants, including allium, possibly also here in Häcklingen as a culinary staples. Unlike Vlaardingen, dairy fats and ruminant fat appears in numerous vessels, and at least one pot contains a mixed dish of emmer grain with likely ruminant component. Unlike Vlaardingen and Häcklingen, cooking at Steinhof focused primarily on processing cereals, including emmer and barley, often with the addition of dairy products, likely milk, where the grain may have been crushed before cooking into grist, which would likely have enhanced the cooking process by improving time, texture, and flavor released into the dishes. Well, significantly, mixed dishes were cooked at Steinhof. In one pot, emmer and barley were even cooked together with addition of ruminant adipose fat, either meat or fat. In general, it appears that at Steinhof, mixed dishes were actually common, with a higher presence of dairy products, but also ruminant, like cattle, goat, or sheep, or deer, and non-ruminant, possibly wild pig, meat, as well as fish oil. But interestingly and significantly, I would say, the fish oil was only found in the absorbed lipid residues at Steinhof. Where at Steinhof, the identification of cereal-specific lipids actually added more pots with cereals to the total assemblage, and mainly indicating emmer, but also occasionally barley. As cereals were likely cooked either with milk into a porridge or gruel, or with animal meat and fat into stew-like dishes. Also for Steinhof, just to sum up, well, that mixed dishes were common at Steinhof, with emmer frequently cooked with milk, ruminant meat or non-ruminant meat or fat. And aquatic resources are also indicated, but only in absorbed residues. And now you will see them all three together as I'm moving on to some concluding thoughts. Where at the inner side level, comparison of vessel contents from Vlaardingen, Häcklingen, and Steinhof reveals both clear correlations and notable differences. In particular, strong similarities are evident between Vlaardingen and Häcklingen, but also undeniable differences. Whereas at Steinhof, daily cooking practices followed completely different patterns. One may wonder whether these differences in cooking patterns are linked to the location of the sites in various environmental settings, specifically wetland, levees versus coastal barriers and dunes. With these distinct ecological zones certainly provided different resources, not only in terms of plant and animal food, but also in terms of suitability of land for agriculture and animal husbandry. Coastal areas, specifically high salt marshes and low dunes, may have been more suitable for cereal cultivation and cattle grazing, while more inland located levees and riverbanks, which are typically of wetland environments, likely supported fishing and hunting, as well as herding of cattle and other domestic animals. Possibly, not everyone may agree with what I'm just about to say now, but it seems to me unlikely that people moved between these levee sites and coastal sites in order to take up cereal cultivation or the other way around. Instead, we might be looking at more permanent sites where people were skilled or specialized, if you wish, either in cereal cultivation or animal husbandry in the coastal areas dune, or more oriented in fishing, hunting, and possibly herding of domestic animals in wetlands. It appears that each of these areas or individual sites played a distinct role within a broader network. At the same time, it is entirely plausible that a degree of mobility existed alongside contacts for the exchange of goods or seasonal gatherings. Taken together, all these elements, whether driven by resource availability, local culinary preferences, or site-specific activity, they all point to deeply embedded culinary traditions, which are reflected in the meals once prepared there in ceramic vessels.